Hi, I thought I would change things up and do an explanation of the answers for the last quiz on classes by video. So the first 5 questions deal with this time class here. And the first question is, how many instance methods, how many instance variables, and how many constructors does this class have? Well, in a class, the first things we usually put are the instance variables, so it appears that there are 2 of them. The constructors usually come next, and they are these 3 things. There'll be 3 of them in total. So remember, you recognize them by the fact that they have the same name as the class name. They have parentheses and whatever parameters they're usually assigning to the instance variables. They also don't have a return type, which differentiates the constructors from the instance methods. That's these guys down here. They have public and then or private, but in this case they're all public. A return type like int or void, indicating no return type. Some parameters, and then a block of code that says what the method does. So in total there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 methods, although some of you said 5 because I don't think you counted the last 2. Alright, then we need to decide which command will correctly create a time object that represents 7 hours and 42 minutes. A doesn't work because the hours and minutes instance variables are private, so we don't have access to them. The next one doesn't work because this is not how get minutes works. You're not allowed to call get minutes and then assign it to 42. The next one's close. It's trying to call the 2-argument constructor, but it has reversed the parameters, so that's not going to initialize it correctly. And the only one left is the last one, where it creates a time object with 7 hours with 0 minutes, and then calls the setMinutes method to change it so that it also has 42. So D is the correct answer. Next question, which of the following can be used to replace the advance by method missing code, so it correctly updates the time? So something you have to know from the directions at the top, it said that the minutes always have to be between 0 and 59. And right now the advance by method doesn't make sure that the minutes are always between 0 and 59. For example, if someone put in m as 1,000, then suddenly our minutes variable would exceed 59 by quite a bit. So we have to essentially take the extra minutes and roll them into the hours variable somehow. And that's why A, B, and E are not going to work, because A, B, and E do not change both minutes and hours. To advance correctly by a certain number of minutes, any of the extra minutes have to roll into the number of hours. So now it's a question of whether or not C or D is right. The correct answer turns out to be C. And the reason why is that the first command is taking the number of minutes and dividing by 60, which gives you the total number of full hours that are represented by the minutes variable, and then adds that into the hours. So like if minutes was 120, that would add 2 into the hours variable, like we want. The second command essentially says only keep the leftover minutes that don't form full groups of 60. So like if minutes was 70, this would assign the minutes variable to be 10, or the remainder when you divide by 60. D is close, but it has the operations in reverse order, which does not work. For number 4, we have to finish the getTime method, and you'll notice that the getTime method has a string return type, which tells us right away that answers A and C cannot work because they're not returning. D also can't work because it's returning the result of calling getTotalMinutes, and getTotalMinutes is giving us an int, which is not what we need to return. Instead, we need to return a string, which is represented by hours concatenated with a colon concatenated with minutes. Question 5 is our last time class question. And what we're noticing is that there's a problem with our implementation, and that is when we return the hours plus the minutes, we're going to get things like 5:4 instead of 5:04. So to fix that, we're going to write a couple cases. It's going to be if the minutes are less than 10. And in that case, that means we're going to have to say that our return is not just going to be hours plus colon plus minutes, it's going to be hours plus colon 0 plus minutes. So essentially our return will include a 0 before the minutes so that the formatting looks right. We also need an else case for what if the minutes are not less than 10. So that means we have at least 10 minutes. So then we can just do the regular version, which is just a colon followed by the minutes. So that would be a Pretty straightforward way to implement the getTime method. Not the only way. I definitely saw people make variables to hold partial answers, and then they built the rest of the answer. But this is probably the standard way to solve this problem. All right, now we're going to leave the time class, and we're going to look at some client code, and it's requiring us to implement a car. So let's look at what we're given. We need to be able to create a car object, which starts with 0 miles and a speed of 0 miles per hour. We need to make a car object that can travel 10 miles, that has already traveled 10 miles and also has a speed of 0 miles per hour. We need to be able to set the speeds of both the cars, so A needs to be able to change its speed to 51 and B to set its speed to 50. We also need to be able to call a getDistance method, and that getDistance method seems to tell us how far the car has traveled, and we need to be able to tell the car to drive for a certain amount of time. So first thing we need, and most of us had this to start, which was good, is we need a class header, public class car. And then in the class declaration, we're going to need some instance variables. So some instance variables that I know we need are going to be the miles driven, and we also need the speed. An optional one that I'm not going to add here is time. You could keep track of the time as well, but I didn't think that was necessary. Next, we need some constructors. The first constructor takes no parameters, and it sets the miles to be 0 and the speed to be 0. As some of you know, if you don't assign these variables, they default to 0, so that was actually optional. The next constructor needs to take in, I believe, the number of miles driven. And so I will assign the miles variable to be, instance variable to be m, and once again the speed to be 0. Now I'm wrapping between pages, which is a little annoying. The next thing that we're going to need, is I believe the setSpeed method. Yeah. So setSpeed is a void method because you can see here there's no resultant value that's being stored in a variable, but it does take in one int that represents a speed. So s is a good name for the parameter, and then it should set the speed variable to be s. That's all setSpeed does. We also need a getDistance method. So public int, because it's returning a value, getDistance, and it's going to return how many miles it's driven. The last method we need was the drive method, which took an amount of time in hours that we were going to drive, and it doesn't return anything. So the way you figure out how far the car is driven is, so I'll make a distance variable. It's just the speed the car was driving at times the time. And then if I take the miles variable and I increase it by the distance, then it'll have driven the amount I wanted. So essentially if time is 1, as it is in the example, that means that the distance for car A will be 51 more miles, and for car B, because the speed is 50, it'll be 50 more miles. There are other ways to implement a lot of these different methods and constructors that are equivalent. If you have questions on those, let me know. But this would be kind of the standard way to implement the class. All right, I've added a lot of blank space here, so let's see if I can find things. Oh, there's that next question. All right, so in this next question, we're supposed to answer whether or not these properties belong to instance variables, constructors, or instance methods. So the only thing that has to have a name that matches the class name exactly is a constructor. The thing that describes the actions of an object, that is definitely a method. The things that should always be private are the instance variables. Here's one that a lot of people got wrong. The things that describe the attributes or properties of an object are the variables. A lot of people put constructor. The constructor is what assigns the variables, but it's the variables that actually are the properties of the object. To create an object, you need the constructor, constructing it, construct, make. And then the only one of these that can have void in its signature is a method. Did I spell constructor wrong? Oh yeah, there we go. All right, now we have some true and false questions. So a class may have more than one constructor. That's true. Yeah, we have that all the time. A class may have 2 instant variables with the exact same name. That is false. You can only have one variable with one name. Now, it is true that 2 different classes can have instance variables with the same name, like money. That's totally fine. One of the purposes of a constructor is to set the initial values of the instance variables. That's definitely true. An instance method may call, use another instance method in the same class. Yep, that's true. You can have methods that call other methods. That can be helpful from time to time. And it is proper style for the name of a class to begin with a capital letter. That is true. All right, so now we're to the last section. So we're given a class called Circle, and we're supposed to write the client code using the Circle class. So we'll notice we have 3 instance variables, 2 constructors, and 4 methods. So the first task is to create a circle object with a center of 2, 3, and a radius of 5. So that means I need to make a center variable, like A, I guess is a good name for it. And I call the new center constructor, passing in the radius first, followed by the center parameter information. For the next one, we need to increase the circle's x center by x and decrease its y center by 2. You are not allowed to do a.centerx because this variable is private, but you can use the moveBy method. And if we do a.moveBy 5, -2, that will pass in 5 and -2 of the parameters and change the center x and center y properties appropriately. Now we need to store the circumference of your circle in a variable. So I'm going to make a double, not an integer, a double variable. I'll call it C, and assign it to be asking my area for its circumference, because there is a getCircumference method. Some of you are leaving off the parentheses at the end. On the AP test, they don't take off points for that if you forget them for a no argument method. Obviously, if you forget it for a constructor or something with parameters, that would be wrong. But they're okay if you forget that. It still annoys me though. All right, now we need to make another circle object. There are actually 2 ways to do this. The easy way is just to do this, because the circle constructor with no parameters sets the radius to 1 and the x and y center to 0. The last one was kind of tricky, and a lot of you tried to call the getArea method to solve it. The problem is the getArea method is private, so you can't call it. Fortunately, there's a public method you can call called areaDifference. So that's what I'm going to call. And I need to ask A for the area difference with the other circle, which is named B. So notice the parameter here to areaDiff is the other circle. And that's stored into a decimal variable again. And that's it for the regular part of the test. For the last part, we had to make some modifiers on this variable. And some of you got 1 or 2 of these, you didn't get all 3. We need it to make it so the variable can never be changed. So that means it's final. That's something a lot of us forgot. We also need it to be accessible outside the class, so it's private. And if you remember from Animation Land in part 5, if you got there, if you make it static, that means it's shared by all instances of the class. So private static final will make the variable have all those attributes. The last one's kind of tricky too, why it's extra credit. I want to make it so that the husband class, when it's created, can let the wife know that this husband is its husband, or her husband, I guess I should say. So I need to send a command to the wife, so I'll do wife dot, and it has a setHusband command. You can see in the wife class, I can call setHusband, great. The problem is you want to write in the name of the husband, and a lot of you wrote Bob here. The problem with Bob is in the client code. Bob is not in the husband class, so in here you can't write Bob. There's no Bob. In fact, in here Bob has a name, which if you got to part 5, is this. Because when you call the husband constructor, you go in the husband class, your name becomes this, not Bob. A little bit of a tricky idea. Don't worry, that question almost never shows up on the AP test, but that's like the only this question they can ask you possibly, so I'm showing it to you just in case. So that's it. That's the quiz. Let me know if you have any questions.